What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you another Divinity lore video, this time about none other than Dragon Knights. So, first things first, there's going to be spoilers for a few different Divinity games, just kind of bear that in mind going forward. I also need to make the distinction between some of the older games and the newer games, that is to say the original Sin series. Now, a lot of the information we have about Dragon Knights comes from the first couple of games that predate even Divinity Original Sin 1. Some of it doesn't line up perfectly with the lore that comes from Original Sin. I mean, I think it makes sense in the end. However, a lot of it doesn't perfectly align as well as you might like. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about Dragon Knights. Dragon Knights have existed as long as the races have existed. Now, Dragon Knights are ultimately the chosen champions of real dragons. Real dragons being their own separate race that was at prominence around the same time as the Eternals that went on to then become the gods later. The dragons are actually credited with creating the world, that is to say Rivellon itself. I have a separate video about that if you're interested. I'll try to remember to link it down below. At about the same time the gods rose to power, the dragons, for whatever reason, we actually don't know, it's never explained, started retreating from the world. It's not believed that they were ever killed off or anything like that, they just simply noped out for whatever reason. However, in the process of this retreating, which happened over thousands of years really, they started taking Dragon Knights. Now this is one of the moments where I want to mention that the old lore doesn't exactly line up with the newer lore. The older lore tells us that the first Dragon Knights were usually things like elves. And then it says that when humans came along, that the dragons greatly preferred them as Dragon Knights. The thing is, though, as far as we know, the gods created the races at roughly the same time, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, there are various ways you can explain that. I just want to point out that some of this stuff doesn't line up perfectly without you making the leaps yourself. So, around the time the gods started creating the races, the dragons started taking champions from them. It's said that they would kidnap kids from their parents when they were little and then train them to become Dragon Knights. Now, then we get to Maxos. So Maxos is in two of the games, that is Divinity Dragon Commander as well as Divinity 2. Now, Divinity 2 he's not physically present in, but he is mentioned a lot. Maxos was possibly a Dragon Knight. It's alluded to but never confirmed in the game whether or not he actually was. He was definitely a wizard that was very into everything draconic, but his actual status as a Dragon Knight is never confirmed hard one way or the other. He's mentioned as a Dragon Knight sometimes in Divinity 2, that is to say it's alluded to him being one, and then in Dragon Commander they make him out to be more of just a wizard who's interested in dragons. But regardless, Maxos is the only other person besides dragons to ever initiate Dragon Knights, meaning he's the only person who was not a dragon who has ever given Dragon Knights their power. Now, this is important because A, Maxos is incredibly old. He is in Dragon Commander, which takes place in 8800 AR, and then he only disappears kind of in the newer timeline, that is to say, which is like 10,000 years later, roughly. Because in Dragon Commander, he's already initiating Dragon Knights. That's important because at some point, Maxos seems to become the de facto head of the Dragon Knights. He's the person initiating them, he's the person they answer to. And it's during this time period that Dragon Knights start being confused with real dragons. Because to the common person, if you see a man turn into a dragon, you're going to, just safely assume that that is the dragon, right? And furthermore, that is confused even more by the fact that powerful dragons, like ancient dragons, can freely transform into anything they want, to the point that children they have in those forms will just be a natural-born child of that form. We see that in Aurora, the dragon from Dragon Commander. Aurora is a dragon who sleeps with the Emperor, who is the player character's father, and has you, a bastard child. However, while your character is a Dragon Knight in that game, that is not a genetic thing. Dragon Knights are the champions of dragons. It is not genetic. They are chosen. Whether or not a kid born that way might be more appealing to a dragon to become a champion, who's to say? But it is not genetic. But my point with telling you this is that while that kid was chosen to become a Dragon Knight, he was, for all intents and purposes, a human-born child, despite his mother being a dragon, technically. So, as you can see, there's an obvious line that is easily blurred, especially if, you were like a human or something living in that world. That would be incredibly confusing, especially because real dragons basically don't exist to the normal people at all. If you see a guy who's literally turning into a dragon, you're going to say that that guy's just a dragon, right? Now, as a result, Dragon Knights almost always wind up being lords and leaders. So we see this multiple times throughout the series. The player character Dragon Knight from Dragon Commander ultimately becomes the Emperor of all of Rivellon for a time. In Divinity 2, we see Lord Lovis and Lord Oribus, who have been given control of areas of land, almost like a barony of sorts, given to them directly by Maxos, actually. In the time of Divinity 2, Dragon Knights are pretty rare, and, for most of the actual Divinity series, that is to say outside of Dragon Commander, Dragon Knights are fairly rare. Now, in the Dragon Commander era, Dragon Knights were actually fairly commonplace. It was not uncommon to see them. Once the games pick up, that is to say in the more recent timelines, with Original Sin actually being the farthest back, at 4 AD, I believe it was, Dragon Knights are much more rare at that point. Fast forward even farther to basically Divinity Original Sin 2, and we know most of what I'm about to talk about because of the Fallen Heroes marketing. Some of it's set in stone because Divinity 2 kind of confirms it, but keep in mind the exact specifics of some of this might change up a little bit. After Divinity Original Sin 2, there is a war that happens known as the Great War. This is supposedly the plot, or at least part of the plot, of Fallen Heroes that happens a couple years after Divinity Original Sin 2 takes place. Now, during this, at some point, Lucian is fake assassinated by a Dragon Knight after the Dragon Knights had came to his aid to fight off the Black Ring after Damien makes his reappearance after a long time of absence, after his escape from Nemesis, which is the subject of Beyond Divinity. Ultimately, this Dragon Knight that fake assassinated Lucian presumably was only able to do so because Source was purged from the world in Divinity Original Sin 2. Again, this was alluded to in the Fallen Heroes marketing. But moreover, the Dragon Knight didn't do it personally. It's that he was mind-controlled by none other than Damien himself. However, as a direct result of this occurrence, the Dragon Slayer Order is formed out of the Paladin Order. The Dragon Slayers, seeing this as the ultimate betrayal, go about destroying absolutely anything relating to anything draconic. Dragon Knights, actual dragons, their spells, their caches, everything related to dragons gets burned. Fast forward to 1300 AD, and there's only one Dragon Knight left, Talana. Now this is part of Divinity 2, and Talana actually gets killed pretty early in that game, but not before transferring her powers to the player character of Divinity 2, who then becomes the last Dragon Knight. For all intents and purposes, as far as we know, that is the last Dragon Knight. You're the very last one. Maxos is gone. He seems to have disappeared along with the dragons themselves. Not literally at the same time, obviously, but Maxos was studying a bunch of things, became interested in the Hall of Echoes, Divine Dispel to leave, and then just vanished in the desert of Youthful Gore. Maxos is gone, the actual dragons are gone, which means everyone who could initiate a Dragon Knight is gone. Even your player character in Divinity 2, for those keen-eared among you, might have been like, well, how did Talana make you a Dragon Knight if that's the case? All Talana did was transfer her powers to you. That does not make a person a Dragon Knight. The player character of that game then actually had to go to Maxos' temple, consult with a bunch of spirits, and then the Dragon Knight was able to pass those trials at Maxos' temple while talking to a bunch of undead folks, basically, which was kind of a workaround, which I don't see a lot of people doing. So unless they write some new lore and, destroy the significance of the player character of Divinity 2, the Dragon Knights end there with your player character from that game. There you go, guys. There is pretty much everything we know about Dragon Knights. I do want to mention some notable ones that we hear about. I have mentioned most of them already, but just to go over them, we have Talana, of course, the player character from Dragon Commander, the player character from Divinity 2, Maxos, maybe. We have Lord Lovis, we have Lord Oribus, as well as Slain, the Winter Dragon, who is actually a Dragon Knight from Divinity Original Sin 2, which I imagine most of you are more familiar with, though unfortunately there's not more to that guy. Lore-wise, pretty shallow. There you go, guys. Kind of a history of Dragon Knights, their place in the world of Divinity, what they are, how they differ from actual dragons, and where they stand across the timeline of the games. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe. I love talking about all things Divinity. But thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.